She thought she was just grabbing a random stranger in a crowded bar to disappear from the man who spent 2 years trying to shrink her into someone quiet. A desperate, impulsive kiss to vanish into the noise. But when she pulled away, the man wasn't a random stranger. She had just kissed the most dangerous mafia boss in Chicago. The rooftop lounge at the Aurelian Hotel buzzed with the electric hum of Chicago's summer nightlife. String lights crisscrossed above a crowd of investment bankers, socialites, and old money trying to look like new money. Amara Bello stood near the bar, laughing too loud at her own joke, gesturing wide with her hands the way she always did when she talked, the way that used to make people turn and stare, and not always kindly. She was 27, a copywriter for a boutique branding agency, the kind of woman who filled a room the second she walked into it. Tonight, she wore a burnt orange silk slip dress, her braids pulled up into a high, dramatic knot, gold hoops swinging every time she threw her head back to laugh. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Loud, vivid, unapologetic. Then she saw him. Preston Vale. Her ex standing by the railing in a navy blazer, a crystal tumbler in his hand, watching her with that familiar, tired condescension, like she was a television left on too loud in a quiet room. Preston was a corporate attorney with a soft voice and a talent for making devastation sound like concern. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. He had spent 2 years methodically teaching Amara that her personality was a problem to be managed. Too much laughter drew attention. Too many opinions made people uncomfortable. Too much of her, period, was simply too much. You'd be so much more likable if you just toned it down, Amara. He'd said it so many times it had worn a groove into her, a whisper that surfaced every time she opened her mouth to speak in a meeting, every time she wanted to dance at a party, every time joy tried to come up out of her before she could stop it. Leaving him 6 months ago had been the first time in years she'd felt like she was allowed to take up space again. And now he was here at her friend's engagement party, watching her with that small, patient smile that used to precede a quiet correction in the car ride home. He started walking toward her. Panic spiked hot and sudden in Amara's chest. She couldn't do this tonight. She couldn't stand there while he leaned in and murmured something soft and cutting into her ear, something that would sound like nothing to anyone watching and would hollow her out completely. She grabbed her drink and turned, weaving through the crowd, her heart slamming against her ribs. She ducked past a cluster of guests near the elevator bank and found herself in a narrow, dimly lit hallway leading toward the hotel's private lounge. Empty. Quiet. Except for the footsteps now echoing behind her. Amara. Preston's voice, soft as ever, threading down the corridor. Don't make a scene. Just come talk to me. Don't make a scene. 2 years of being told that in that exact tone. She looked around wildly. No side doors. No escape. Except for a tall figure standing near the end of the hall, half turned toward a black marble wall, checking his phone. Amara didn't think. She closed the distance in 3 strides, grabbed the stranger by his tie, and kissed him. She braced for him to recoil. Instead, one large hand slid to the small of her back, warm through the silk of her dress, and pulled her in like he'd been expecting her. The kiss that was supposed to be a shield became something else entirely, something that made her knees go soft and her mind go completely, blessedly quiet for the first time in months. He tasted like dark rum and cedar. He kissed like a man who did nothing halfway. Preston's footsteps slowed, then stopped somewhere behind her, and then retreated, muttering something under his breath about not wanting to interrupt. Amara pulled back, breathless, her lipstick smudged, her pulse roaring in her ears. I am so sorry, she said, staring at his chest, at the dark gray suit, the platinum watch. There was a man. My ex. I panicked, I didn't know what else. She looked up. The face looking down at her was carved out of quiet menace and unfair beauty. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, a mouth that curved not into anger, but into something slower and far more dangerous. Amusement. Interest. Is that so? His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that had never once needed to raise itself to be obeyed. Before Amara could stammer another apology, Two men in black suits stepped out of the private lounge doorway behind him, hands already moving toward their jackets. "Boss," one of them said, "problem." Amara's stomach dropped through the floor. "No," the stranger said, eyes never leaving her face. "No problem." He raised two fingers. The men melted back into the doorway they'd come from. "Who?" Amara started. "Damian Cross," he said simply, like the name should mean something. And from the way the two armed men had just materialized out of nowhere and vanished on a hand signal, Amara had a sinking feeling that it did. If you're loving this story so far, hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, it only gets more intense from here. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have kissed a stranger to escape? Let's go. Amara had heard the name before, in the hushed, nervous way people mention things they'd rather not think about too hard. Damian Cross. The man who owned half the shipping contracts moving through the port of Chicago, and, unofficially, the man who owned considerably more than that. People who crossed Damian Cross didn't file lawsuits. They simply stopped being discussed. And she had just used him as a human shield and kissed him senseless in a hallway. "I have to go," she whispered, already backing away. "Amara." She froze. "How do you know my name?" The faintest curve of his mouth. "Your friend introduced you at the bar an hour ago." Loudest laugh in the room. Hard to miss. Heat crawled up her neck, an old, familiar shame, the reflex of 2 years spent apologizing for being noticed. "Sorry. I know I'm a lot." Something shifted behind Damian's dark eyes, something that looked almost like anger, though not directed at her. "Who told you that?" "What?" "That you're too much." He said it like a fact he intended to correct. "Who taught you to apologize for taking up space in a room?" Amara didn't answer. She turned and walked away fast, her heels clicking unevenly against the marble, and she didn't look back to see Damian Cross watching her go, one hand pressed thoughtfully to his own lips. For days passed. Amara told herself the kiss had been an aberration, a 5-second fever dream she'd never think about again. She went back to her normal life, the branding agency downtown, happy hour with her best friend Zola, the group chat that lit up with memes at 2 a.m. She almost believed she'd moved on from the strange, electric encounter in that hallway. Almost. Because Preston hadn't stopped. He'd started texting again. Long, calm paragraphs about how he just wanted to talk, how he missed the real her, how he was worried she'd lost herself since they broke up. Code, always, for you're being too loud again, and I don't like it. He showed up outside her office on a Wednesday, standing by the revolving doors with 2 coffees, smiling like nothing had happened. "Amara. Just 5 minutes. Preston, we're done. I told you that in March. You're being dramatic." His voice stayed soft, reasonable, infuriatingly calm, the exact tone he'd used 100 times to make her feel unhinged for having any reaction at all to his cruelty. "I'm trying to have an adult conversation, and you're making a scene on a public sidewalk." Making a scene. 2 words that had trained her, for 2 years, to swallow her own voice. "Get away from me," she said, and her voice shook, not with fear this time, but with rage, old and finally surfacing. Preston reached out and closed his hand around her wrist. Not violently. Gently, almost, the way he did everything, softly enough that no one watching would call it what it was. "Don't embarrass yourself. Let her go." The voice cut across the sidewalk, quiet and absolute, and Amara felt it land in her chest before she even turned to look. Damian Cross stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, dressed like he'd stepped out of a boardroom, flanked by the same 2 men from the hotel. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. Preston's grip loosened on Amara's wrist immediately, some animal part of him recognizing a predator without needing an introduction. "This isn't your business," Preston said, though his voice had lost its practiced calm. Damian walked closer, unhurried, each step deliberate. "You put your hand on her arm on a public street and told her she was making a scene for objecting to it. I'm making it my business. Who even are you?" "Someone who's noticed you've called her the same 3 things, dramatic, embarrassing, too much, in the span of 30 seconds. Damian's dark eyes flicked to Amara, softened by a fraction, then hardened again on Preston. "I imagine you've had 2 years of practice." Amara's breath caught. He'd remembered every word. Preston's face went pale. This is insane. I don't even know this guy. You will. Damian's voice dropped, quiet enough that only the three of them could hear it, and somehow more frightening for the quiet. If you contact her again. If you show up outside her office again. If you so much as let her name cross your lips to anyone in the city again, you and I are going to have a much longer conversation, and I promise you, you will not enjoy it. Preston looked between Damian and his two very still, very silent men, and something in his calculating lawyer's brain did the math correctly for once. He stepped back, straightened his jacket with shaking hands, and walked away without another word. Amara stood frozen on the sidewalk, her wrist still tingling where Preston's fingers had been. You okay? Damian asked, his voice gentler now, all the ice gone out of it. You remembered what he called me, Amara said, staring at him. 4 days ago. In a hallway. For 30 seconds. I remember everything that matters. He studied her face like he was memorizing it. Coffee's getting cold. Do you have 10 minutes, or is that already too many for one day? Okay, if Damian just became your new book boyfriend, smash that like button right now. And comment below, do you think Amara should give him those 10 minutes? Let me know, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. 10 minutes turned into 2 hours. They sat in a corner booth of a quiet cafe 3 blocks from her office, and Amara found herself talking more than she had in months, telling long, winding stories with her hands moving through the air, laughing loud enough that the barista glanced over twice. Damian didn't flinch. He didn't glance around to see who was staring. He leaned forward like he wanted to catch every word before it escaped. You do this thing, he said, where you almost start a sentence with an apology. Watch it. Do I? You just did it again. He smiled, faint and genuine. Don't. Not with me. Nobody had ever told her to take up more space. Amara didn't know what to do with the feeling that came with it, warm and unfamiliar, like sunlight on a part of her skin that had spent 2 years in shadow. Over the following weeks, Damian Cross became a fixture in her life in a way that should have alarmed her and somehow didn't. He showed up with the exact coffee order she'd mentioned once in passing. He sent a car for her when it rained. He listened, actually listened, to her 3 a.m. thoughts about advertising ethics and childhood memories and the specific injustice of pineapple discourse, and he never once looked at his phone while she talked. But there were things he didn't tell her. Things happening in rooms she never saw. In a private office on the top floor of a building with no sign on the door, Damian's second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man named Elias, laid a folder on the desk. The Kovalenko family's been asking questions, Elias said. About the girl. Damian's jaw tightened. Asking what? Who she is. Where she works. Whether she means anything to you. Elias's voice was flat, careful. Word is out that you shut down a lawyer on a public sidewalk over her. That's not subtle, boss. I don't do subtle when it matters. The Kovalenkos think it means you've got a soft spot. A pressure point. Elias closed the folder. They're not wrong. Damian was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the skyline. Then we make sure they understand that a soft spot on me still bites. The following Friday, Damian took Amara to a private dinner at Solene, an intimate restaurant known for its impossible reservation list. She wore a deep emerald dress that hugged every curve of her braids loose around her shoulders, gold bangles clinking with every gesture as she told an elaborate story about a client meeting gone hilariously wrong. Damian watched her with the quiet, focused intensity of a man watching something rare. You're staring, she said, catching him. You're the loudest, brightest thing in every room you walk into, Damian said. I like watching it happen. Amara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Preston used to say the opposite. That I needed to turn it down. That people found me exhausting. Preston, Damian said, is a small man who felt threatened by a woman with a pulse. Amara laughed, sudden and surprised, loud enough that 2 tables turned to look, and for once the old reflex to shrink didn't come. Damian reached across the table and laced his fingers through hers. Say something you've never said out loud, he said. Something you've swallowed because someone told you it was too much. Amara searched his face for the trick in the question and found none. I want a life that's loud, she said finally, quietly. I want to laugh too loud in restaurants and cry too hard at commercials and love someone with everything I've got instead of rationing it out so I don't scare them off. I want to stop being sorry for existing at full volume. Damian brought her hand to his mouth, pressed a slow kiss to her knuckles, eyes locked on hers. Then be loud, Amara. I built an empire so I'd never have to be afraid of anything again. I am not about to be afraid of you. The mahogany doors of the private dining room burst open. 3 men in dark jackets stormed in, weapons raised, shouting in accented English for everyone to get down. The Kovalenkos had come to make their point. Damian moved before Amara could process what was happening, flipping the heavy table on its side and pulling her down behind it, his body a wall between her and the gunfire that erupted a half-second later. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. Amara pressed her face into Damian's chest, her hands fisted in his jacket, and he held her like nothing in the world could get through him to reach her. Elias and 2 more of Damian's men returned fire from the hallway. The exchange was brutal, fast, and over in under a minute. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the Kovalenko men were down. The third knelt, disarmed, hands zip-tied behind his back by Elias. Damian rose slowly, pulling Amara up with him, running his hands over her shoulders, her arms, her face, checking for injury with barely controlled panic in his eyes. Are you hurt? Amara, look at me, are you hurt? I'm okay, she breathed, shaking. I'm okay. He exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater, then turned toward the kneeling gunman, and the tenderness in his face vanished into something colder than Amara had ever seen. Tell Alexei, Damian said, his voice a low, lethal calm, that the next time he sends men after something that belongs to me, I will not be sending back a message. I will be sending back nothing at all. My heart cannot handle this right now. If you're as invested as I am, drop a comment with a fire emoji and hit subscribe. Afrok Stories Hub has so many more stories like this coming, and you do not want to miss them. The days after the shooting blurred together in a haze of fear and adrenaline, and something that felt dangerously close to certainty. Damian moved Amara into a guarded penthouse on the Gold Coast until this is handled, and despite every instinct telling her this was insane, she found herself staying. You don't have to keep me hidden away, she told him one evening, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I have a life. A job. Friends who are wondering where I disappeared to. Damian came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, resting his chin against her temple. I'm not hiding you. I'm making sure the world is safe enough for you to be as loud in it as you want to be. That's not the same as asking me. He turned her gently to face him, his expression softening into something almost sheepish. You're right. I'm sorry. Old habit. I solve problems before people finish telling me they exist. His thumb traced along her jaw. Tell me what you need, Amara. Not what I think you need. What you actually need. It was such a small thing, being asked instead of told, and it undid her completely. She reached up, pulled him down by his collar, and kissed him, slow and deep and unhurried, pouring 2 years of swallowed volume into it. Damian groaned against her mouth and lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the wide leather couch, laying her down like she was something precious and unbreakable at once. Tell me if this is too much, he murmured against her throat, his hands sliding up the curve of her waist. Amara laughed, breathless. I don't think that phrase means what it used to mean anymore. Good, Damian said, kissing his way along her collarbone, deliberate and unhurried, because I intend to give you everything and none of it is going to be halfway. What followed was slow and searching, and entirely without apology, Damian mapping every inch of her like he meant to memorize her, murmuring against her skin every time she gasped or laughed or arched into him that this, all of this, was exactly the amount he wanted. There was nothing measured about it, nothing withheld. When Amara finally fell asleep tangled in his arms hours later, it was the first full night's sleep she'd had in 2 years. 3 weeks later, Preston made one final mistake. He'd been quiet since the sidewalk confrontation, but quiet, Amara would learn, wasn't the same as gone. Desperate and humiliated, he'd gone looking for leverage, and in doing so, He'd stumbled into a conversation with the wrong people, a low-level Kovalenko associate looking for exactly the kind of information Preston, bitter and reckless, was foolish enough to hand over. Elias burst into Damian's office without knocking. "Boss, Gallo just called. Preston Vale met with a Kovalenko contact this morning. Sold them Amara's schedule. Building layout for her old office. Everything." Damian went very still. "Where is he now?" "Gallo's men picked him up an hour ago. He's downstairs." Damian descended to the private security level in silence, Amara close behind him despite his attempt to leave her upstairs. "If this involves me," she'd said, arms crossed, "I'm not hiding from it in a penthouse." Preston sat in a hard chair under fluorescent light, his composed lawyer's calm entirely gone, his hands shaking. "I didn't have a choice," Preston said the second he saw them, his voice cracking. "They knew things about me. Debts. I didn't think they'd actually." "You sold her location to armed men," Damian said quietly, "because you were embarrassed she left you and moved on." "Damian." Amara's voice steady, cutting through the room. Everyone turned. She looked at Preston, really looked at him, at the man who had spent 2 years teaching her to be smaller, now trembling and pathetic in a folding chair, and felt nothing where fear used to live. "You spent 2 years telling me I was too much," she said to him, voice ringing clear in the small room. "Too loud, too dramatic, too everything. But look at you. You're the one who fell apart the second someone challenged you. I built an entire life back out of the pieces you tried to shrink. You built nothing but a rap sheet." She turned to Damian. "Don't kill him. Not because he deserves mercy. Because I refuse to let him be the last interesting thing that ever happens to me." Damian studied her for a long moment, something fierce and reverent moving behind his eyes, and then he nodded once. "Elias, make sure Mr. Vale understands that his new address is anywhere at least 1,000 miles from the city, effective immediately. And make sure the Kovalenkos understand exactly how little his information was worth to them." Preston was hauled out, sputtering apologies that no one in the room cared to hear. Damian turned back to Amara, framing her face in both hands. "You didn't run." "I'm done running," Amara said, gripping his wrists. "And I'm done being quiet about what I want." "Then tell me what you want." "You," she said, without hesitation, without a single flicker of apology. "Loud. Permanent. All of it." Damian kissed her then, right there under the fluorescent light of a room that had seen far darker things, kissed her like a vow, like a man who had built an empire out of never being afraid of anything and had finally found the one thing he intended to keep forever. "Say it as loud as you want, Mia Cara," he murmured against her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure this whole city hears you." She had accidentally kissed a stranger in a hallway, desperate to disappear. In return, he had spent every day since making sure she never had to disappear again. If Amara finding her voice again hit you right in the chest, smash that like button right now and subscribe to Afrok Stories Hub so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below. Do you think Amara made the right call sparing Preston? And tell me, would you have kissed the stranger? See you in the next story.